It is a privilege and a little intimidating to fill in for Pastor John. So I'll try to channel him as much as I can by saying y'all as much as I possibly can. And acknowledging the courtesy chuckle wherever appropriate. If you're visiting either here or online, do try to come back sometime when he's leading service, because you won't want to miss his particular brand of charisma. Come back if for no other reason than you just never know what might come out of his mouth. So no, it's been a true blessing for the whole church, for the staff and for the congregants to have him as interim pastor. So we're very blessed there. What I want to talk about this morning is spiritual elderhood. Some of you have heard me speak on this subject before. The organizing question is, how do we, as we age, become not just older people, but wise elders? What does it mean to be a wise elder, and how do we get there? So when I was a young man, I attended a church for a while that exposed me to a lot of great old hymns. It was really more about the girl than the church. But while I was there, I heard a lot of great old hymns, many of which you all would recognize, like I'll Fly Away, or When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, I'll Be There, and May the Circle Be Unbroken, things like that. Wonderful songs that I still love, that are still a part of me. But I noticed gradually that there's a theme that sort of threaded through them, that said essentially, life is full of sorrow and misery, and our job really is just to endure it until we can die and go to heaven. And that was kind of the theology in those songs. Now I'm going to give you an example, so brace yourselves. And you may have to help me with this. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. You all know those songs. So I'm 20, 21, and something about that is not striking me right, because it seems like it's a peppy song, it's infectious, it's wonderful, but it's told from the perspective of somebody who just cannot wait to get out of here. They're kind of sitting around waiting to die, and I'm 20 years old, and I'm looking 6, 7 decades ahead, and all there is you're just supposed to endure until the day that you pass away. And it just wasn't the model that suited me, and I couldn't articulate it to myself at the time, I'm sure, but I wondered whether there might be a different model for how we might live out our lives rather than sitting around and waiting to die. Maybe life could be a sacred journey from beginning to end. At every phase, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, late adulthood, and elderhood. Maybe each of those phases is necessary and maybe full of promise, and maybe something for us to accomplish in each of those phases. It just seemed wrong that we should sit around and wait to die. But I know that a lot of people, that's what happens, especially in our elder years. We become we begin to feel useless and purposeless. And our culture makes us feel those things. But maybe there's a different model to be had, one in which we continue to grow, where we cultivate our spirituality, where we reflect deeply on our life, where we have something to offer to people around us, and where old age is not a period of decline so much as a period of fulfillment. Maybe it's a culmination where all of our pieces come together and we finally realize our full potential. At least maybe that's a possibility. We don't live in a culture that celebrates elderhood. We live in a culture that celebrates youth and vitality. We don't live in a culture that goes to its old people in search of guidance. We don't even expect our old people to be wise. I don't know why that is exactly, but I suspect it has something to do with the very founding of this country. You know, when the first European settlers came over, they understood themselves to be leaving the old world behind, a world that was stagnant, that was hidebound in tradition, where it was almost impossible to break out of the station that you were born into. And in contrast, they came to what to them was the new world. And it was a continent of boundless opportunity. And if you were young and energetic and dynamic and ambitious, anything could happen. And so those are deeply ingrained American values that I think have generated a lot of wonderful things. But one of the prices, there's a price to pay for that. And I think old people have paid a price for that. I think old people in this country often have been seen as without much purpose, without very much usefulness. Often we get an image of old people where they're weak, where they're feeble, where they're sort of comically befuddled, and so forth. You know, by the 1930s, we developed a model where we could retire at a certain age and then collect social security. And that's been the model ever since. And as life expectancy has expanded, we've had more and more people live more and more years in that state of unproductivity, where they don't have a purpose, where they're not consulted, where their knowledge and their wisdom hasn't been called upon, and they haven't found a useful purpose in society. And the price to those people is fairly great. We have a lot of old people who are isolated, who feel useless, that don't have purpose, who are waiting around to die. And we haven't equipped people to become elders. You know, many of their worst qualities begin to harden around them because we haven't given them the tools to rise above it. They haven't left behind their anger or their resentment. They haven't found a way to rise above their fears. They've done harm to others and had harm done to them, and they haven't been able to move past that, and so they become some version of their worst self rather than their best self. And the price, I think, to our society for all of this is quite great, right? We don't have this enormous reserve of experience and wisdom to draw on and seek counsel from. We go to licensed professionals and experts to get advice instead of consulting our elders. Because we just haven't set up our society that way. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think there's a way to imagine a different scenario in which old age is a time of fulfillment rather than decline, and where people do have purpose right to the end of their lives. And it is a sacred journey, clear to the very end. But that doesn't happen by accident. We don't become wise just by virtue of becoming old. I think it probably takes a community with the foresight to nurture and prepare people to become wise elders. And it takes individuals who are willing to look at themselves frankly and to take responsibility for assuming that mantle themselves and discovering their gifts and making sure that they exercise their powers clear to the very end. So if you do research around this topic, you'll find that there are quite a few resources intended to help people on their journey to becoming wise elders. I've got a fairly long list of books I'd be happy to share with anybody. But it comes down to being intentional about it and making use of tools. And I'd like to give you a couple of those tools as examples today. Let me get a drink. So one starting place is to ask ourselves, what is a wise elder? What qualities do those people have? And I think the answer is different for everybody. Commonly, you'll find things like generosity of spirit, insight, clarity of vision, compassion, equanimity, serenity. One of the things I've been interested in is the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. By the time you get to be an old person, you have acquired quite a storehouse of knowledge, either through your career or study or just managing your life and your family. All those years add up to quite a bit of knowledge. But knowledge in itself isn't wisdom. I think knowledge is necessary for wisdom, but it's not sufficient to wisdom. So I'd like to give you an illustration of that that's all too familiar to me. Imagine an old guy who loves cars. He's worked with cars all his life. He knows them inside and out, top to bottom. He could take an engine apart piece by piece and put it back together blindfolded. Knows everything about a vast storehouse of knowledge about cars. And imagine that he has a grandson who's just turned 16, just got his first new car, and he goes to the old guy and he says, "Granddad, my car's not working right. Could you help me figure it out and help me fix my car?" And the old guy lights up just like flipping on a light switch, right? This is his time to shine, right? He gets to share this vast knowledge. And so he jumps to it and he sits center stage, and it feels good. He shares all his vast knowledge about the car, and he spends hours talking about cars to this kid, and he goes down 10 different rabbit holes, and he's the kind of guy who you ask him what time it is, and he'll tell you how to build a watch. Then he'll tell you the history of Switzerland. And he keeps going on, and he never stops long enough to see this kid's eyes glaze over, right? Just feels too good. What an ego boost, right? He gets to hold forth. And maybe he solves the kid's problem. Maybe he needs to change his spark plugs, and the old guy helps him do that and so forth. And that's valuable. It's practical. There's value in that. But while he's shared his knowledge, he probably hasn't shared his wisdom. He hasn't exhibited any wisdom for his grandson. He never paused long enough to look at that kid and say, "Wow, he's 16 years old, just got his first car. The world has opened up for this kid," right? The freedom, the mobility, what fears come with that? What hopes come with that? What sense of responsibility comes with that? Maybe that kid needs somebody to talk to and confide in. Maybe he needs an old trusted elder to be at his side and be his ally and believe in him, right? And guide him. And the old guy has shared his knowledge, but he's missed his opportunity to share wisdom. And so, when I think about what a wise elder is, it's somebody who's found a way to rise above their ego, right? And they project something beyond their own personality into the world. So that's just one tool we have. Another is what they call harvesting our wisdom. By the time you're in your elder years, you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot, and there's been a lot of heartache, and there's been a lot of loss. You've lost loved ones, you've lost relationships, you've experienced setbacks and disappointments. And while you're in those, you have no perspective on them, but maybe from the vantage of old age, you can look back on that and ask what those experiences had to teach you, right? Maybe only in old age do you have the distance, the emotional distance, to look at them and ask, what can I learn from that? And what can I share from harvesting that wisdom? Forgiveness is also a tool. Maybe in old age, and maybe only in old age, do we have enough distance to forgive the people that we need to forgive. It's a question of justice often. Someone has harmed us, and they need to be punished. And if we were to just let them go, then that would be a great injustice. Somehow they would have gotten away from it. So we keep them imprisoned within ourselves so that they can pay the price. But the problem is we have to stay in that prison with them. But maybe in old age, and again, maybe only in old age, are we strong enough to open those doors and let those folks out, and then follow them out and be free ourselves? Legacy, thinking about our legacy is another tool that we have on the pathway to wise elderhood? What are we leaving behind? What have we made? What relationships or memories or institutions or anything? What is it that we're leaving behind? This church is the legacy of people who have gone on, who had the foresight to build something to endure past themselves. As elderly people, we can ask ourselves, what are we leaving behind? You know, I'm in a peculiar position. However miraculously, however unlikely, I have a very young son, and so I think about what I'm going to leave behind for him all the time, because we won't have the number of years together as men that a father and son normally expect so. And so I began keeping a journal for him soon after he was born, and in that I share everything, what's on my mind, how I think about things, what interests me. He gets a sense of how my mind works, what kind of language I have at my disposal, what experiences I've had, who his family is, and so forth. And hopefully he'll have that, you know, as part of the legacy that I leave for him. Maybe he won't care about it. I can't control that. Maybe his kids someday will ask what their grandfather was like. Maybe they're searching to understand who they are, and they'll come to Walker and they'll say, "Well, what was Granddad like?" And he'll say, "Well," he'll pull those journals out and he'll say, "Well, he was kind of a crabby blowhard who griped a lot about politics. Here, you can read for yourself." So maybe that'll be valuable to them. I don't know. I hope so. But we can think about what we're leaving behind, and that's a tool that we have on our path to becoming wise elders. We also need to think about our own mortality and reconcile ourselves to the fact that we're going to die. We live in a culture that is famously death-denying, and so it's easy, even in old age, to pretend like it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And I think a wise person comes to grips with that and thinks about it. And maybe even is able to turn death from being an enemy to being an ally, to being a partner and a companion, someone who forms the precious life and days and years that we have, that they become more intensely valuable to us when death is at our side, when we're conscious of where we're going. Some people say that all of life is preparation for that moment of death. Maybe there's some wisdom in that. It seems to me that really wise elders have a certain ferociousness about them. There might be serenity and there might be peace. They've reconciled all the conflicts of their past and come to a place of peace, but there's also something ferocious about them. They're at peace with their past, but they have also looked frankly and starkly into where they're going, and they're not afraid of it. And they go boldly and fiercely into that, and something of that otherworldliness comes out in them, and it gives a chill to the people around them, and it sobers the people around them, and gives the people around them something valuable to take away. So I think that it's not just that old people have to be weak and docile. There's a kind of strength that comes at no other time in life, if we allow it to, if we nurture it within ourselves. There's a kind of power that comes with getting old, and we should help each other tap into that and discover it within ourselves. So we at Trinity have started a group of folks to talk about these questions. It's called Trinity Wisdom Circle, and we meet every second Wednesday of the month. And so far, that's just been a wonderful experience. Really valuable conversations of folks who are very thoughtful in sharing their lives and learning from one another. So everyone is invited to get involved in that. If it's at all of interest to you, let me know and I'll tell you more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.